Bobby Marks from ESPN.com tweets that Robert Covington is just the 8th player to have his contract renegotiated since 1998. The salary increase from 1.6 to 16.7 is the largest one-year renegotiation in league history. And Robert Covington, we talked about this earlier, that he is one of the great NBA stories. Bobby Marks, ESPN.com, front office insider here. The renegotiation being the largest, that's a story in itself. But he is really one of the great stories in this league, from where he was and where he has been and what he's gone through with this franchise, and now where this franchise appears to be going, that he has kind of stuck it out and got that contract.
Oh, you're right. You're right, guys. Good to be with you. And, I remember him coming out of college. We had, when I was in New Jersey, we were still Jersey at the time. We brought him up for a draft workout, and then, you go to Houston, you make it there a year, you get waived after the season, you're in the Grand Rapids and the Pistons G League team, and then you get signed to, a 4-year contract by Philadelphia, and you have to go through some, you guys know, some really lean years, and I was at a game when they were actually booing him there a couple of years ago. So it's a great story. He is certainly has earned it. The ironic thing is that although that increase goes from 1.6 to right around 16 and change, as far as small forwards go, he's still ranked 14th among guys who are paid. He's outside the top 10, which is pretty amazing. But it's a good story for him, and he has certainly earned it.
Can you kind of explain to the listeners why he was not able to get a raise beforehand? This 3-year anniversary of this deal, this Sam Hinkie, who was kind of notorious for these deals. So why was it that they had to wait until this specific date?
Yeah, Covington signed a 4-year contract back in 2014 for a player that signs a 4 or 5-year contract. You have to wait until the 3rd-year anniversary for a renegotiation standpoint. Renegotiation and extension is a little bit different. Renegotiation is if you're using available cap space to basically change your current contract. Extension impacts the future years here. So, and that's why these are very rare. We saw with Westbrook and Harden, I believe, a year ago before they signed these big contracts, where both those guys bumped their salaries up from 16 and change to around 26, and that's why we had to wait. Covington signed that contract November 15, 2014. We had to wait to the 3rd-year anniversary before they were able to renegotiate it. And it's important to note too that if they hadn't gotten anything done right now, he would have entered free agency unrestricted. He would not have been a restricted free agency. So, to get something done right now and not let him go into the summer, I think that was the big goal there for Philadelphia.
So the big thing is here for Philly now that you can kind of explain, Bobby, for the listeners, is the fact that they did this renegotiation and gave him a lot of money for this particular year helps them out, in the summer.
It does. I think if you're looking at it, and I almost look at it as almost like an NFL contract where you see these players sign in the offseason, they get a big signing bonus, and then they have a base year number. What Philadelphia was able to do is jump that number from the that 1.6 number up to 16 and change for this year. So basically, essentially, he got about a $15 million signing bonus, and then the renegotiation rules, it's different than extension, allows you to drop the second year, which is next year, down 40%, which they did that down to $10 million. So although you got a big hit this year, his number next year and in future years is basically the equivalent of what the mid-level exception is. It's 10, 10-8, 11-6, 12-4, and that's a pretty modest number there. They did lose a little bit of cap space as well as when you did that Embiid extension a month ago, but they've got a lot of options in the future, either to use money possibly in 2018. You can roll it over to 2019 if you want to do that before Simmons and Saric are, their contracts are up the following year. So they've got about a 2-year window to use cap space right now.
Yeah, Bobby, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because Brian Colangelo has been busy, as you write, and getting a couple deals done, but it's not like this limits the options that they have. How do you see some of those options playing out with some of the guys whose deals are coming up and what they might do with them moving forward?
Well, I think you look at the summer of 2018. It's a top-heavy free agent class. Philadelphia could have, I think, $30 million, $25 to $30 million in cap space. If you factor in, if they retain that pick, that Laker pick, they'll have their own pick. I think you can go one or two ways. You can, stay conservative, bring back Redick or Amir Johnson on a one-year deal like you did this past year, maybe overpay and keep this entire group together and keep rebuilding. Or if there's a player out there that makes sense, I think, certainly a position of strength that they'll need is some shooting. You can go out there and do that. There's about 150 free agents right now projected. I think there's a big drop-off. I only see 20 to 25 players who are probably starters. I think it's a good market next summer for guys who are good bench players. I call them key reserves. So I think you can go to that conservative route, or you can move that to 2019, and maybe you go out and get Klay Thompson or Jimmy Butler. Where you can shore up your shooting for the long haul.
Well, and that leads into my next question, which is, you're so good with the numbers and what the cap space means and stuff like that. But I asked Mike Gill earlier if a couple of years ago this team won 10 games, right? It wasn't a place that was necessarily a hot spot or a free agent destination. Are games like last night where Joel Embiid goes off for all those points and players see the deals that guys are getting and the extensions they're getting, hey, I want to go there. Is Philadelphia becoming a more attractive free agent destination?
Well, I think it is, and I think that's where you have to have something to sell to free agents. I think that's the difference between where the Sixers are right now, maybe compared to where the Lakers are. I think that the Sixers are a little bit ahead of the curve. If you are a player or a free agent this upcoming summer in July, with Simmons and Embiid, Saric, we'll see when Fultz comes back. With that group there, I think that's an attractable destination. Especially you're in the East. So basically, if what happens with LeBron, we don't know. You'll basically be looking at Boston, Toronto, probably Washington there. So I think that's the most important thing, is to let these young players continue to develop and have something to sell to free agents when you get into July.
Bobby Marks, ESPN.com front office insider, spent some time in the front office with the New Jersey/Brooklyn Nets. And what do you think about the deal? I mean, they got a great deal with him for these first couple of years in the league, but the extension here, do they still have a good deal with Robert Covington?
I think it's a great deal. I really do. And I think the deal that Sam did back in 2014, it helped them for the first 3 years. I think it became a little bit of a hindrance, when players like Covington, TJ McConnell, he could be in the same position next year, not at this large number, but you start to outperform your contract. And the downside is these 4-year contracts is the unrestricted tag, and that they're not like first-round picks where you have the right to match. So I think it's a win-win. I know that you do lose a little bit of cap space, but there are certainly ways, if you need to create more, that you can do that this summer.
Bobby, obviously, you mentioned they signed the deal with Embiid in the offseason, and now Covington here. So essentially for this year, are they kind of capped out for this particular season? If they wanted to make a trade, if they're in playoff contention, they want to bring somebody in, are they kind of in a tough spot for this particular year?
Not necessarily. I think we still have to figure out what's going to happen with Okafor. Okay. I would be surprised if he's, on this roster come, the first week of December. I think there's going to be a resolution there pretty soon. So if you move him, you get rid of his contract, you'll have some room there. You'll have an open roster spot. You still have your, if you do use room, you still have your room mid-level, which is 4.3. So you'll have some room once, you do move Okafor, and the likelihood is you probably won't take back something. Maybe you can get a future draft asset back for him. So eventually there will be some flexibility, but it's got to be until Okafor is actually traded here.
It's a unique situation, and you wrote about that it's a unique contract here and what it means for them to, their ability to add another star player. But when you look at Philly now with Simmons and Embiid, we don't know what's going on with Markelle Fultz, but they hope, do you include Robert Covington as one of those key guys in what the Sixers do and the way they play?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think you've got two core pieces with Ben and with Joel. Joel certainly franchise level. If when healthy, and we saw that the last. We've seen it, but basically the whole year, and especially the last couple of games here. And I think Fultz, you can probably put him in that developmental stage. But I think Covington is probably right in line after those two main guys there. I think he's a. When I was in Brooklyn and New Jersey, we would have these Monday morning personnel meetings. We would kind of go through the league, and the question that always came back, it started with and it ended with, is how do you go out and find these wing players, these 6'8", 6'9" players, especially where the league is going, where you can play multiple positions. And with Covington, especially not a player that was drafted, and you found him under the radar. Sam did 3 or 4 years ago. I think you could probably put him as your third or fourth best player on this team. So to have him locked up and with your young players and Embiid, you're done. I mean, you don't have to worry about this core, and then you have and then it's just a matter of what you want to do with room. And I was talking with some people about this, and I'm sure you're going to hear the train coming. I bet you hear that LeBron train coming. And if we talk about LeBron James this upcoming summer, and what his options are going to be, if you look at going back to Cleveland, and we've all talked about L.A., and if Philly continues to play well and that there's no injuries down the stretch, you can make an honest case for him that might be the best situation from a basketball standpoint if you don't want to go out west, to go down and play in Philadelphia.
It's funny you say that, Bobby, because I had mentioned that a little while back, that if this thing works and this team plays well, you got an older LeBron looking at a younger team saying, I like that. I don't maybe have to carry a team so much anymore, and they have legs. I mean, this team can be a good team for a while, and I can just kind of be the missing finale piece to that. So I would agree with you that you're going to start to hear that. In fact, you are starting to hear a lot of people jumping on that LeBron train. But one thing, the Sam thing, the thing that I had mentioned before you came on, Bobby, is the Sixers, the onus to not really win games, that the pressure on Brett Brown is, hey, you don't need to go out there and win games every night. To develop players, Robert Covington doesn't get a shot to play on a team that even has to be 500 or try to be the 8 seed, right? Like, that's one of the things that the Sixers were able to kind of accomplish out of this. They were able to give playing time to players who maybe wouldn't have got it on teams that the mandate was to win.
No, you're right, and I wrote about it. It's almost like these angel investors out in Silicon Valley that are investing in these startups. You sprinkle some seed money on here, and if it works, great. Great, and if it doesn't, then it's a small risk. And I think Sam certainly had with Covington, TJ, Rashawn Holmes. We can go down the line of Hollis Thompson. Who had a run there on one of those contracts. There's a lot of these type of players.
Jeremy Grant.
Some hit, some miss, and the ones you missed, it didn't cost you so much because you didn't really spend much in the off season, and you had the cap space to do it. So. And I think that Covington, from where he started in 2014 when they signed him, used basically the last 2 years as it's a developmental stage for him, and to be in a role where he is right now.
So I guess we see it a little bit, but do you think we're going to start seeing more teams start to follow this Sixers model, or do you think that they're kind of, we had a listener come up to us earlier here and say, do you think Sam gets another job? I said the problem with Sam gets another job is I don't think these GMs are going to be as willing to just say, yeah, take my contract. Like the story's out there a little bit, so it might be more difficult to duplicate what they've done.
It is. It's hard. It really is. I mean, and I think a lot of the fortune right now is these guys are healthy. I mean, Embiid is healthy, knock on wood. Ben Simmons is healthy. They're playing good basketball. But living in northern Jersey and taking that train down a lot to see this team. When I worked in the media and when I worked in Brooklyn, the last 4 years was painful.
Yes.
I mean, you guys know, sitting in that building in January with 8,000 people in a cold arena and watching a product that you're thinking, maybe could Kentucky actually beat these guys? And, you bring up that question. And I just don't know how many general managers would have, the patience and the stomach to go through something like that. I think it's great that we're talking about it, that it potentially could work, and there's still a lot more to go here. But to go through it for 3 or 4 years, that's a hard thing, and you've got to have a lot of patience from your owner. I think you have to have a lot of trust with your head coach. I think with Brett Brown, that's the amazing thing. Like how many general managers would have pulled the plug on the coach and said, you know what, let me go. Or even with Brian coming in and you know, kind of that Brett's not his guy to go in a different direction. And he's a survivor, and he's worked, you know, no matter what the talent was on the court, you know, 2 years ago or watching last night in L.A., he's the same person and he's coaching the same way.
Bobby Marks, ESPN front office insider. You know, I opened the show by saying watching Joel last night and Ben Simmons and getting to see these guys every night. Now, I've been a big proponent of the process. I've been on since day one saying finally someone has a plan to get out of the mediocrity of the NBA. I know a lot of people that listen to the show didn't like to hear it. However, watching those two guys every night and only having to wait 3 years to do so. Franchises wait decades to get those kind of players, and they might only get one of them in the history of their franchise. You might have two. I would trade, Bobby, whatever you could tell me was realistic success for the last 3 seasons. If you told me 50 wins and a second-round playoff, that was the best year you've had, I would, and I don't think they were getting there, by the way, I would trade those in to say I waited 3 years for these two guys.
No, you're right. And I think that's for fans, that's the one thing you want is hope. You know, how can you sell hope, you know, even when it didn't look great when you had both those guys out most of last year with injury. And I think, you know, it should only get better, I would think. I mean, we haven't even talked about the number 1 pick in the draft this past year, who I think could be really a good player if he can get healthy and figure out what his role is going to be when Markelle is out there, and that's another bonus there. So you know, they could have a really good pick in the draft this year, you know, potentially with that Laker pick, either number 1 or 6 to 30. So that's a potential there. So there's still some ways to grow. We talked about the cap space, so it's not like this is a finished product. I think this is just the start of things. Right,
and that's something that I think that you've done a good job of highlighting, Bobby, is they are not plateaued with this core.
No, they are not plateaued. I've seen when I've been a part of teams when you are plateaued, and this is kind of where you're where it's as far as it's going to go here. And I think, you know, when we get into, and I thought the goal all along, you know, to get into February, March is to play some competitive games. I think they can certainly exceed that. I think they can. How the East is starting to shake up, you know, I think they're certainly a playoff team based on, you know, some of the teams that have not played very well right now. So, you know, I think it's just got to, you know, I think you've got to, you know, temper expectations a little bit. I think last night and with this road trip, I think certainly put them on the national spotlight right now. And, I mean, you've got a franchise-level center, and you've got a point guard who's 6'9", 6'10", that we haven't seen in a long time here.
46, 15, 7, and 7 will do that.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, Bobby, before we let you go, because it was a national game last night, you mentioned Markelle a second ago. You know, there was so much attention for the point guard that was on the other team. In fact, the broadcast I watched kept sort of a running tally of his misses, and people were delighting in that. Do we put too much not pressure, that's not the right word, but too much attention on these high draft picks, expecting them to come in and just perform right away? Or is that justified given the amount of money that they're paid and the place they're taken?
Well, I think Alonzo's a different animal here. I think based on the LA hype, and then you add the dad in here, I think that's kind of where, you know, we've put the expectation. I think some of it's self-inflicted, not by the player, but maybe by the dad. And I think that's kind of where we look at him going into playing in his hometown to kind of be the savior here. And it's not easy for a 19 to 20-year-old point guard. This is a point guard-driven league here. It's almost like in the NFL with quarterbacks here. And I think he'll be fine. I think the one thing that I would question with the Lakers is that they don't have a veteran point guard backing him up. There's really not much of a safety net there. I know he didn't play most of that fourth quarter last night, and I think that was maybe a direction they maybe should have gone, is to go out and get a little, maybe more of a mentor there for him.
Hey, Bobby, in your time in the front office, did a parent ever come into play?
No, we never had a parent. We never got that phone call at night after a game why their son, didn't play.
Wow.
for 20 or finished a game there. So I think if you have a strong front office and I think if you have a strong coach, I think you kind of nip that right off the bat when they come in for their press conference when they get drafted.
One point guard, 19 years old with Daddy Dearest. One guy, 21, that sat out a year, by the way, and is now one rebound away from a triple-double last night and just 6'10", too. I mean, just the parallel there, the contrast is really amazing.
Bobby Marks guys at ESPN.com. Check out that piece on what Robert Covington's deal means for the Sixers' future. It's a really good in-depth piece on Robert Covington's contract extension. And check out my conversation with Robert Covington on our YouTube channel, 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, guys.